Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session where we're going to look at spatial reasoning and STEM. I'd like to commence by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're meeting today and pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So I'm speaking to you today from Yugambeh country on the Gold Coast. Ilyse and Ross are speaking with you from the Gunawak country in Canberra. So thanks for joining us today. Welcome back if you have been to some of our presentations earlier in the year, and a special welcome if this is the first presentation that you're attending. So we want to spend about 20 to 25 minutes speaking about STEM, and we think that's an important part of children's preschool experience. So our experiences as a team over the last 7 years on the Early Learning STEM Australia project has shown us that young children can, in play-based ways, engage with quite a range of STEM concepts. And so the emphasis on this particular presentation is on the role of spatial reasoning within STEM. So I'll introduce myself first and then I'll hand over to Ilyse and Ross. So my name's Kevin Larkin. I've worked on the ELSA project for the last 7 years. And previous to that, I was a primary school teacher and then deputy principal. So that's a little bit about me. Ilyse.
Hi, my name's Ilyse. I'm an associate professor at the University of Canberra. My focus is on doing research around spatial reasoning and how it supports STEM achievement, which is why I'm speaking to you guys today. I've also worked on the ELSA project since 2019, and before that, I was in the United States, where I was being trained, I guess, and working in that system.
Hi everyone, I'm Ross. If you've been to these sessions before, you've seen me, communications manager at the University of Canberra, and for the ELSA project. And I'll be in the chat if you need any assistance or have any questions. I can pass those on to our presenters.
And importantly, Ross is driving our presentation today, so we might bring that up. Ross? Thanks, Ross. So we want to step through this brief presentation with you. If you have questions, you can pop them in the chat, or we'll leave some time at the end of the half hour for you to have questions for us. So firstly, I want to just talk about STEM and you. So in our workshops with hundreds of preschool educators now, so that we had the privilege of proving what we already suspected, that it is you guys that are the experts in the space, and that you are the critical people in the room with your young children in supporting their STEM learning. And so what we've always tried to do, and what we'll try to do today, and what we'll continue to do in the future, is build on what you're already doing. So we're confident you're doing a lot of the things that we'll be talking about, and then we just like to try to, if we can, add a little value to what you're doing. So we like to start with what STEM is and what it isn't. And if you've been to some earlier presentations that we've done this year, you'll be familiar with this slide, but it's important that we frame it for potential new people with us today. So STEM, the acronym, officially stands for Science, Technology, Engineering and Mathematics. However, the ELSA team, as we've explained in earlier videos, think of STEM in a more integrated way. So in brief, we think STEM should be more about what you're doing, what your practice is, rather than an emphasis on the content of science or technology or maths or engineering. So by way of example, instead of learning about how plants grow, we would think it's better for children to be gardeners. And in the process of managing a garden, they're going to be learning about how plants grow, what foods plants need, etc., etc. So for us, it's much more focus on the doing of STEM rather than just the learning of the content of STEM. But regardless of the definition, and as I mentioned earlier, you're already doing a lot of STEM in your centres. And in earlier examples, we spoke about water play, water features, the building corner, etc. So in this particular presentation, we want to talk a little bit more about spatial reasoning and the role that plays in STEM. So I'm going to hand over to Ilyse.
Hi, everybody. So the next bubble that we're going to go into is what is spatial reasoning. So I'm going to first talk to you about what spatial reasoning is, and then I'll give you 2 examples of spatial reasoning that your children would likely encounter, on a given day. So first, spatial reasoning is really is actually a broad term because there's lots of different kinds of spatial reasoning skills. And these skills may or may not be related to one another. But what we do know is that they all involve, so my words here, the mental manipulation of 2D and 3D relations. I'll apologize for saying that now. What I mean is just imagining those types of relationships between and within objects. So maybe imagining where you are relative to something else. And when I say manipulation, what I mean is being able to change that around. So maybe imagining being, rotating an object or being somewhere else. And I'll talk about those 2 examples, but these different skills involve that type of imagination and manipulation in your mind. And we use them all the time and every day. And importantly, we use those same skills in many STEM tasks. So Ross, if you go into mental rotation, I'll give an example there. So I already said this one type of spatial reasoning skill is imagining an object rotate. And that first picture is actually of my son playing Lego with me and trying to make shapes that were the same. And so he had to imagine rotating the pieces around to see where they fit to build that object. And so we see mental rotation in block play, puzzles, just trying to imagine how things fit together. You might have to try and picture it moving in your head to see how it goes in. The second picture is of actually my mother and my colleagues at a conference recently where we were all driving back to the train station and they had to figure out how to fit all of the luggage back into the boot of the car. And so there's 3 grown adults arguing and working together around how to turn all of the pieces of luggage so they fit into our very small boot. And so you can see that mental rotation for children are the same kinds of mental rotation skills that we're using as adults. And then here's the other example I gave is from chemistry. Organic chemists have to think about how symmetry of molecules, and they'll imagine those molecules literally rotating around to see if they're symmetrical and those types of properties. And so my point here is that we're using them in every day, children are using them every day, and so are organic chemists. Ross, if you pop out from here, and I can go into my other example, which is perspective taking. So this skill, this spatial reasoning skill, is imagining viewpoints that are different from your own. And this is actually a child who I don't know, who is trying to play hide and seek and just completely visible to everybody else. I don't know if you worked with, I'm sure you've all worked with young children, but when they try and hide and just their whole back half is hanging out, and they're not really imagining what you can see because they can't see you. They don't think that you can see them. And having that skill of being able to imagine where, what other people can view and how that's different than your own is a spatial reasoning skill. And young kids actually do have it, but they often also fail at it. The second picture is of me and my son going to the hot air balloon festival here in Canberra. And I absolutely got it wrong where we should stand relative to where the balloons were taking off, where we needed to be. And this is a photo of us after we realized that I as the adult had gotten the perspective wrong, running across the bridge to get to the other side so we could actually see the balloons. And again, that perspective taking we take as adults is the same skill. And then 2, turning to geologists as another STEM discipline. So not as a STEM practice, but just looking at the kind of disciplinary experts and thinking about the different perspectives as they navigate rock terrains to be able to connect the different pieces of rock to see how they fit together. They're also exhibiting that kind of large scale perspective taking. So you can go back to does it go back to the main bubble, Ross? The point here is, again, that there's these mental rotation and perspective taking are two very different skills, and you might feel really good at one. Some people say, I am so good at packing a boot of a car, but gosh, I cannot navigate to where I have to go for the life of me, or vice versa. So some are really related to each other and others are less related, but these skills are used in STEM, in everyday, in adulthood, and in STEM domains.
Thanks, Ilyse. You just reminded me of a favourite photo of my child who was playing hide and seek and put a bucket over his head.
Yeah.
And was amazed that we could find him.
Yeah.
So very, very interesting.
There's beautiful research on children who don't get proportional reasoning is another kind of spatial reasoning skill, and they try and like fit their little bodies, but like in like a tiny car or a tiny slide, and they don't quite fit. Where they've just not gotten those proportions yet either, but they develop it with practice and obviously with instruction. So,
Thanks, Ilyse. So the next bubble. So why should we teach spatial reasoning? So Ilyse has given us some definitions of what it is, and so the next couple of slides we want to discuss some of the research that's happened. We won't go in depth in the research. Don't panic, but it's research that's been done around the world and included in the ELSA team. That has highlighted three main benefits for teaching spatial reasoning. So first bubble there, thanks, Ross. So the first one is improved skills. So a critical point, and Ilyse touched on it, was that regardless of where you sort of benchmark yourself as having spatial skills, they can be improved. So if you're having, in the adult examples Ilyse gave, if you're having trouble packing things, you practice that, those skills can be improved. So that's where you guys come in as so important, that just by doing some simple add-ons, value adds to what you're already doing, you'll be doing the children a great service in improving their spatial skills. It's also a requirement that's identified in the EYLF, and in the foundation and onwards in the national curriculum. And so in the EYLF, you'll see words such as spatial awareness and orientation, structure and patterns, representation, spatial language, and Ilyse will talk about some examples of these a little bit later in this presentation. And we think that by the very nature of our world, it's a 3D world, it's a spatial world, we're moving in that world all the time, and perfectly for preschool, active movement, play, exploration, both in indoor environments where they get a different sense of perspective and they get a different sense of scale, and outdoor environments are perfect places for children to improve their spatial skills. Thanks, Ross. And so these improved spatial skills are important in their own right for children to be interacting with their world in a spatial way. But coincidentally, fortunately, luckily, they also translate or transfer into improved numeracy. So lots of studies have highlighted the links between spatial reasoning and mathematics learning and numeracy, and these links are consistent. In other words, it's been continually found in a range of studies. They're predictive, so success in spatial reasoning predicts success in mathematics and across other STEM areas, and it strengthens over time this relationship. So early training, sort of things that you can do, and I don't use training in a negative way, I just mean early exposure to spatial reasoning opportunities lays a very solid foundation for success in later years. And the types of things that we do in the ELSA program, orientation, patterning, spatial language, are all predictive of success in later maths achievement. So the takeaway message is giving children opportunities to practice their spatial skills, to be involved in things that require their spatial skills, improves mathematics learning, and as is the case with much in education, and you guys already know this, the earlier we start with a lot of these things, the better. And we really enjoyed working with educators such as yourselves and our very youngest learners. Thanks, Ross. And so just finally on this benefits of doing this spatial reasoning, spatial reasoning skills are the largest predictor of, when children are older, entering a STEM field and staying in that STEM field. Now, we don't really know what the future will hold for jobs, and the children you're dealing with, 4 and 5 year old, might 15, 20 years before they're entering the workforce. So we have to take a bit of a guess, but we're confident that spatial reasoning will be one of the skills that will be very useful for them, regardless of the occupation they're going into. Low spatial reasoning, to look at a sort of negative, is a barrier for access to those STEM disciplines. And remember, we think of those STEM disciplines quite broadly. And particularly, and we touched on this in an earlier presentation, girls are at risk for having low spatial reasoning skills, but they can be, as alongside the boys, improved with access and opportunity. So we think it's really important to foster these spatial reasoning skills early. They can create initial success for children and interest within STEM, which has a cascading effect for them later in primary school, secondary school, and beyond. Thanks, Ilyse.
Awesome. So the next bubble is around spatial reasoning tools. So I'll start by kind of giving an overview of what I mean by that, and then again, looking more deeply into what this is. So we talked about spatial reasoning skill, which is some sort of mental operation that, that we can improve and learn. Spatial tools are the ways in which we can help develop that. So spatial tools can help us develop spatial reasoning skills, but they also serve to help us understand STEM tasks or STEM activities that maybe if we don't have the spatial reasoning skills to do, these spatial tools can help support still that understanding. So spatial reasoning tools are ways to engage children in spatial reasoning, as well as, I don't have that on the slide, but also engage them in STEM more broadly and help with that learning and understanding. And as Kev has said, and I know we've said at ELSA all the time, you probably are already doing a lot of these types of activities. But what I want to do now is really just articulate them and bring them to your awareness so that you might be able to do them more explicitly, more intentionally, when you find those intentional teaching moments. So we're going to focus on 3 kinds of spatial tools: spatial language, spatial gesture, and spatial representation. And so in the next 3 slides, we'll go into the bubble, and I'll explain more. So spatial language, these are words that describe the relation between and within objects. And there's different kinds of spatial language. So one might just be location and direction. So you might say something like, you're sitting on a chair in an office. Orientation and transformation are spatial language that refers to moving something or changing what it looks like. So you can, you need to turn the block so it fits in. Shapes, labeling shape names is always important. So we have square, triangle, circle. Just as an aside, I think this is really important to show shapes that are different kinds of triangles, different kinds of rectangles, so that people can understand what those categories are. So often, a lot of the shape books and toys will have just what I call canonical, which would be like they only show an equilateral triangle and they don't show like isosceles or scalene. And you don't need to necessarily learn those words, but showing that there can be different types of triangles just helps children understand that, the properties of a triangle. And so giving them that language and variation of that category label helps them learn. So that's a free fact that I'm adding in there. Also, so there's spatial dimensions that you can describe, drawing their attention to. So a lot of times in preschool settings, we work on sorting or ordering, and we can do that by color or by things that we like to eat, lots of different kinds of attributes. And here, there's just an example could be around spatial dimension. So you might be able to draw their attention to things that are big versus small, or narrow versus wide. And then you can sort or order on those types of spatial attributes to help reinforce that understanding. Spatial features and properties that I was talking about before about the triangle, it has 3 sides, it has 3 corners, and using that language to help them consolidate and really understand what it is they're supposed to be paying attention to. And so we can use language to highlight spatial relations, drawing their attention to them, whereas they might have missed that before. And the example pictures I have are actually from our ELSA apps, where we work on some of these spatial language skills. So using, prepositions to talk about actions they should do to, take all of the objects off the shelf. Or you could play hide and seek. So we have these cards that you can hide and they have to find them, and you can use prepositional language to say, well, I hid it, under the rug between the bookshelves, and using that language to help them play hide and seek, or follow the leader, or even what's Simon Says, lots of games that we can play with it. Go ahead, Ross. So another example of spatial gesture is just spatial gesturing is a kind of tool. And this, gestures, I think sometimes are really focused on just maybe the hands, but thinking more broadly about the body and how we can embody these spatial words and understandings. My poor children are always making appearances in my slides. This is my son. He's gesturing under. We were playing a game where we worked on our prepositional language, where you were trying to go under something or over something, and we were using our bodies to do it. So gesture helps children and also adults in different ways. One way is offloading what I'll call their working memory. So that means we can only keep so much in our minds. And if you're trying to juggle too much, it's hard to remember what all of the pieces of information are. And so sometimes if you put it out on your fingers and you hold that information in your hand, like the number 4 is out here, then that's the one less thing you have to juggle. And you'll see children do it all the time when they're learning how to count. As a good example, they might say, oh, what's 2 plus 1? Well, they don't have to keep that in their mind. It's represented on their hands, and then they can count, 1, 2, 3. It's great, a tool to use, a spatial tool to use to help offload that memory, that work that you're doing in your mind. Another way gesture helps, though, is also this word I used, embodiment, which is really grounding these new ideas, these abstract ideas, in with our actions to help better understand them. And so, yes, that's a grounding that occurs that makes more complex ideas a bit more understandable. Go ahead, Ross. And the last example I'm going to give of a spatial tool is spatial representation. And this is just where we represent ideas spatially, and it's going to help children, and I should have put in here, and adults to better understand spatial concepts. This is actually an example that came from a classroom where they were using one of our apps that it does patterning, but it's representing different dance movements iconically. So I think there's an octopus, a seal, and clapping, and they're just different hand movements that you would do. And the children, although that picture looks like maybe an adult helped, drew the different movements in cards to create a pattern. It's an ABC pattern. So it goes octopus, seal, clap, octopus, seal, clap. So ABC. And then asking children to abstract that pattern using other objects. So here goes blue, yellow, red, blue, yellow, red. But being able to represent those patterns spatially helps them, again, understand what it is. And so, yeah, so there's lots of things that you can represent spatially with maps, with drawings, with sketching, as just a way to better understand what it is that you're trying to figure out. So go ahead, Ross. So I think I'm in the next slide for any questions.
Are there any questions in the chat, Ross? Or
No, so if anyone has any questions, you can pop them in the chat. We will also send an email round early next week with this video and slides for you to view later if you would like to. Or you can have a think about any of this and send us an email as well. Doesn't look like any questions though, so we can probably keep going.
No movement on the chat. Well, if you do have a question, yeah, please let us know. Yeah.
Yeah, so we fly a bit blind here. We Ilyse and I can't see the chat, so I'll just finish wind up. I know your time is precious, so I really want to thank you for coming along today and having a listen to what we wanted to talk about spatial reasoning and the importance in young children's learning. We hope we've shown you some new ways to incorporate spatial reasoning into the STEM activities we're sure that you're already doing in your centres. We have one more presentation. You can come again on Friday if you like, but it'll be the same presentation on Friday. But we have another presentation, I think, Ross, it's going to be maybe in November, which will finalise the presentation for the year. I think Ross was going to drop, he may have already done so in the chat, links back to some of our earlier presentations this year if you didn't join us for them. Kim Simoncini spoke about the role of picture books in STEM. We had a look at the EYLF, the new EYLF, and STEM and intentional teaching. And some other colleagues of ours from the Uni of Canberra spoke about girls and STEM. So feel free to jump on board. Those presentations, again, go for about 20 minutes. So as parents, and in my case, also as a recent proud Story Park granddad, so I get the little alerts from Story Park when my grandson's been up to things. Thanks for all you do for our young children. We're really sincere about the fact that you are incredible educators and really make a big difference to the children that you teach, and set them on their way for a lifetime of good learning. So Ross, the next bubble there.
Yes, and I was just going to say, as there was a question in the chat about if this presentation is aligned to our K-2 program. Just for those of you asking, we are talking here about, in the ELSA examples of our preschool program for sort of 4 to 5-year-olds, we are running a separate pilot program starting next year for primary school K-2. Which we still have an expression of interest open on elsaschools.com.edu.au, which I can put in the chat as well, which is a separate project.
Yeah, I would note to say that it's a separate project, but it is built on a lot of the same kind of core principles and values around the STEM practices and spatial reasoning, logical reasoning. And we're just extending what we're doing here in with the foundation or kindergarten to year 2 context. So if you're interested, it's highly aligned, but this is a separate program that's intended for preschools. Is that fair, Kat?
Yeah, that's perfectly fair. Yeah, and I was just thinking, if you're a preschool centre that's attached to a school, or if you're a preschool centre that's near a school, you can go over and have a coffee. Certainly we're looking for expression of interest. We've had quite a lot of interest at the moment, but we want to make sure that the interest is from around Australia. So particularly if you're not from maybe New South Wales, please contact us, go to have a look at that expression of interest. We'd really like to get a broad representation of schools across Australia. And in the meanwhile, feel free to explore the ELSA program for your centre. So this program is for the year before formal schooling. You'll find at that website linked to some quality STEM resources that, again, builds on what you're already doing. So feel free to have a look at those links. Thanks for giving up your time today. I hope you've had a bit of a chance to have some lunch, perhaps while you're listening to us, and then you can head outside with the kids and do some hide and seek or follow the leader and use some of that rich spatial language that Ilyse was talking about. So thanks for joining us. Hopefully we'll see you online again soon. Cheers.
Thank you. And we have a repeat session on Friday at 1 p.m. too, if any of your colleagues want to come along. Thanks very much.